Debate moderator. The debate subject is men's rights a left-right issue? Debating in the affirmative on the subject of is men's rights a left-right issue is Keyster, a commentator in the men's rights movement. Debating in the negative on is men's rights a left-right issue is Paul Elam, founder of A Voice for Men. Opening statements will take about 10 minutes each. Paul will be starting with opening statements, followed by Keyster. Afterwards, each party, in turn, will be given 5 minutes to rebut each other. Once the rebuttals are complete, each party, in turn, will be able to ask a question for the other participant. Each person will be able to ask one question per turn for 2 turns each, and 3 minutes time is allotted for each answer. After that, we will have closing statements and conclude tonight's debate. This will be somewhat informal, gentlemen, and while time will be kept, I will make allowances for some slight overage. Please do not abuse the privilege. When the bell is heard, you have reached your initial time allotment. If you feel you have nothing else to say during your turn, then feel free to cede the rest of your time. Paul Elam, you may begin with your opening statement.
Thank you, James, and thanks, Keyster, for showing up to this debate and bringing your opinions. I hope it's going to be as interesting as I think it can be.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. Before we engage in any debate, though, on matters of right and left as they apply to the area of men's rights, especially in the United States, I think it's first important to acknowledge that the concepts of right and left in pragmatic terms have very little actual meaning in modern society. They're iconic relics, artifacts of a Cold War era political system that now resides mainly in the Western imagination. It's easy enough to see this with a quick comparison of our last 2 American presidents, 2 presidents who bailed out the same Wall Street criminals, who both waged the same illicit wars, who have both directed policies to spy on the American people, and who have both undermined the U.S. Constitution in order to expand government power. One might say that the only major policy difference between these 2 men is the disingenuously named Affordable Care Act, which amounts to forcing the American people to get down on their knees and give insurance companies $1 trillion blowjob. Even that, the distinction only holds true till you examine George Bush's Medicare Part D plan, no less socialist in nature, yet comes from a so-called right-wing president. We are a society now governed by the interest of corporations, which caters to the dominating spending power of women. Our nation's politicos are only theatrical props vying for a warm, cozy spot in the corporate pocket. In this respect, nothing anymore is a right versus left issue. That jargon is just for campaigns, just pablum for the brainwashed masses to argue over before voting on their whore of choice. And I assert that anyone who believes otherwise is seriously deluded. This leads me directly to the argument that men's rights are certainly not a left versus right issue. The only way to make it appear otherwise is to reduce the range of issues faced by men and boys to something that fits an outmoded dinosaur of the political narrative, and to make feminism the only enemy to men's rights. The issues faced by men and boys make both of those things impossible. There are a wide range of men's issues, many of them directly affecting our basic human rights, that were with us long before feminism reared its hateful head and long before we even entertained the notion of left versus right politics. Circumcision, more accurately called male genital mutilation, predates feminism and the left, as does male disposability and legally enforced chivalry. Male-only selective service, excuse me, I lost my place here, predates feminism and is not a product of left versus right politics. Unlike women, men have never had the right to vote that was not directly tied to their being subject to conscription. Is this a legacy of the left? Were laws that imprisoned men for failing to properly care for their wives a product of the left? Was the tender years doctrine, which assumed the default superiority of women in custody decisions, a product of the left? were laws which made husband's property automatically joint property upon marriage, but allowed a married woman to continue to hold her own property after marriage, a product of the left. There are many more similar questions from a historical perspective, and of course the resounding answer to all of them is no. But we are time constrained here, so let's take a more contemporary look at what can only be described as the political right and left working in unison to undermine the rights of men. The Violence Against Women Act, which also created a federal rape shield law, was drafted and signed into law by 2 Democrats. It has also been renewed and extended, including when George Bush, with a Republican majority House and Senate, passed reauthorization. The only real resistance it ever encountered was from Republicans, but only on the grounds that the 2012 renewal sought to include protections for same-sex couples and illegal aliens. Nowhere in the political rights rhetoric or public statements about VAWA was any mention of the glaring bias against men that the original act put into law. In fact, I'd like to challenge my esteemed opponent to cite a single instance in American history when the political right ever raised an objection to government infringing on the rights of men as a class. Where is the great right hope, sir? Is it perhaps Phyllis Schlafly, who successfully crusaded against the Equal Rights Amendment in order to maintain female privilege and exclusion from the hardships of real equality? It was certainly not from Florida Governor Rick Scott, a Republican who last year vetoed a bill in Florida that would have ended lifetime alimony in that state. And it was not from Republican Governor Paul LePage of Maine, who not only has turned a depravedly indifferent eye to what is happening with the false rape prosecutions in his state, but has also taken to the Men Can Stop Domestic Violence canard and shame sandwich so popular with people on the supposed left. If men's rights is a left-right issue, where are the politicians on the right taking a stand on the Dear Colleague letter? Where are the politicians on the right that are taking a stand against our corrupt family court system? You know, the one that was launched after Ronald Reagan signed no-fault divorce into law. I can tell you where plenty of them are. Many of them are Republican, supposedly conservative, supposedly right-wing judges voted into office by supposed conservatives who are now a part of the chivalry for profit scam that destroys our families and our children. There is your right-wing politicians with gavels in hand, practicing gynocentric corruption, stealing men's home, ripping them away from their children, and locking men up for being broke right after breaking them to begin with. How about Bill Bennett, a great American conservative icon, writing in CNN that men are pathetic and admonishing them to man up and focus their lives on the care of women? This is the great solution of the right. I have mentioned much about the US, but it is similar elsewhere. In the UK, it was Tory MP David T.C. Davies who asserted that single mothers were above being stereotyped, but not what he called feckless fathers, whom he advocated putting in chains and forcing into labor for unpaid child support. The problem that my esteemed opponent will have in establishing that men's rights are a left versus right issues, and I hope bear with me, I'm having a computer problem. The problem that my esteemed opponent will have in establishing that men's rights are a left versus right issue and why he cannot possibly succeed at making that case is because gynocentrism is not a left versus right issue, nor could it be since it far predates modern politics, even as it greatly affects them now on both sides of the political fence. Gynocentrism is the biggest obstacle to the full realization we have of men's human rights going today. Gynocentrism is the enemy. Feminism and left-wing politics are only two ways it is expressed. It is also just as dominant in right-wing politics and traditionalism. It's true enough that feminism emerged from and draws most of its sustaining support from the left. I would never deny that. But like I said, feminism is only one problem. Traditionalists, the regressive throwbacks that use law and social pressure at every opportunity to force the burden of disposable utility on the backs of men, often at the expense of their rights, calls the political right home. from both sides, from its secular and religious factions. That is what makes them such useful handmaidens to leftist feminists. That is what makes them, under the veneer of the dumbed-down dog and pony show of mainstream politics, indistinguishable. I'll be listening now with an attentive ear to what Keyster has to say, but the thing that I'll be looking for, I'm afraid, is the one thing that he cannot produce because it is not there. If there are solutions to the issues of men's rights on the political right, there's a long-standing history and current governance on many levels to point to and prove it. It is not with smugness that I predict that pointing and proving will not be seen anywhere in this debate. And that, at least in my opinion, is your real challenge, Keyster. If feminism is a left versus right issue and there are solutions on the right, please point anywhere in the political landscape from past or present and show me individuals and institutions on the right that make your theories salient. For all I can see on the right or the left is gynocentrism, and any men's activist must oppose it. Mr. Moderator, I yield my remaining time.
And with that, we will move on to Keyster. Keyster, you may now make your opening statement.
Yeah, I don't know whether I want to, get into a lot of the specifics or address each one of these issues one for one. I could do this, and I might miss a few. That was a lot. But I guess to answer your last question first is that the Paycheck Fairness Act, which Harry Reid sponsored and brought out from subcommittee to be voted on in the Senate in 2010, right after the Democratic shellacking in Congress, it failed to go to cloture by one vote, and that one vote was Scott Brown, who is a moderate Republican, because he has to be a moderate Republican, but I think he truly is, from Massachusetts. And otherwise, we would probably be looking at the possibility of untold regulation and oversight through the equal opportunity people that kind of police all that over our corporations regarding, you'd have to report your payroll basically, and genders in similar jobs would have to receive equal pay. I mean, it was just a massive government intrusion into the private sector on who was paid and why they are paid that amount. And I think we all know the gender pay gap myth. And I really think the media, and I think, as much as it's still kind of trampled at, tossed out there now and then, I think they're finally kind of onto it, and it's been kind of debunked, and they still like to throw it out there. But I think there's data good data that refutes that. And I think as a political hot potato, politicians have to pick their battles, and and they have to win votes. And the Paycheck Fairness Act is not even on the radar screen. There's too many other things going on politically that need to be overcome, and they're all kind of jockeying and positioning themselves for the 2014 midterm coming up in November. It's all about positioning against that. And paycheck fairness just doesn't have enough steam, even with Obama. And speaking of which, his first act of legislation, or executive order, I should say, not legislation, but executive order, was the Lilly Ledbetter Act, which I look it up on the internet if you don't know what that is. But that was the very first executive order he signed in after several weeks in office. And to my knowledge, no one's ever used it as a precedent or brought it to court. If they would have, it would have been on the news, at least Fox News perhaps, or in conservative circles. But it was kind of worthless, but it was a bone he threw to the National Organization of Women and the Democratic feminist backers that he depends on for defeating Hillary in their primary. So he just got that out of the way right away. But there's other things, probably child daycare or the Step Forward or whatever, is basically government-funded pre-K is probably higher on his list than that. Regarding the left-right issue, the battle between liberals and conservatives, that kind of ideology, the individual versus the group and things like that, that's been going on since Plato, and it has a long storied history through time, all the way up to John Locke, who influenced our founding fathers of the United States, and they based a lot of their philosophy off of more of a conservative viewpoint. But I don't think that the battles that happened between left and right were never really fully resolved. And George Washington had a chance to resolve that battle once and for all between Jefferson and Adams, and to a certain extent Hamilton, and he just chose not to. I think he liked the way it was, and it's been going on ever since then. And we live in a pluralistic society, and we're a divided country, and left and right, is very real in our politics and everything else. And I think the United States kind of epitomizes the fact that the country was formed around a left to right conflict, and that continues to haunt us to this day. And the population kind of tilts the scales back and forth, as it sees fit. What I look at is really working within the system, and in this democratic, republic that we live in, we've got a system that we can address men's issues through it, either judicial or legislatively. Legislatively is a little tricky because so much of parental law is on a state basis. So that gets very difficult. But if you could get a win in a state for fathers' rights and joint custody and things like that, it could bring some publicity to the movement that you had this big win at a state level. On a national level, it would probably need to be more judicial, and that is a perfect example to me would be VAWA. The Violence Against Women Act is just, doesn't even stand constitutional muster as far as the 14th Amendment and the Equal Protection Clause. It's very, now the feminists will argue, some funds go to men too, and VAWA protects children too, and some children are male, so it doesn't really matter. But even if you were to challenge it at the Supreme Court level, you'd have to start out, of course, in district court and work your way up through the appeals process and so forth. And if you got something like that to the Supreme Court, it would draw attention to the fact that women are being seemingly favored by this law in violation of the Constitution. And I think you would probably win. I know there are 4 justices that would vote against it because they feel as though that kind of social remedy and financing is justified. And there were Senator Orrin Hatch and also my name's drawing a blank now, but there were 2 senators that stood up against VAWA, and their basic question was not only the gay rights side of it, should we fund gay and lesbian couples, but also just the funding. And Ted Grassley is the other senator, and he was asking where, in subcommittee, which was televised, he was asking, where does this money go? Where does this 500, 600 million go? It goes into a black hole and nobody knows. So he was trying to combat it from that perspective, and this was very close to the war on women narrative that was being pushed out through the media, and they fought hard on it. There were Republicans that voted for it, but there are Republicans that that depend on the female vote in their particular state more than some others, and they're very careful to note that. And also, Democrats typically, at least for Obama, I think it was about 76% single women and about 56% married women voted for Obama. So he is kind of he may just be the first feminist president. I'm not sure. But at any rate, I guess my thing on that is that there is a way to redress these men's issues through the system. It's not easy. It's the best system in the world to do so, but it can be done, and I think the movement should probably start moving on beyond the social messaging and propaganda and the manosphere that's out online, and start seriously looking into political remedy. And that's it.
All right. Well, we've got both of our opening statements taken care of. Mr. Elam, you have 5 minutes to go ahead and rebut Keyster's opening statement.
Thank you, James, and again, thank you, Keyster. I appreciate the historical perspective on the left-right struggle, the conservative-liberal struggle that has been with human beings for quite some time, and I certainly appreciate the political overview. But I think there is a real problem, Keyster, in that you're not addressing the core of the problem. The question here is whether or not that men's rights is a left-right issue. And as I think I illustrated in my opening statement, if we identify the issues of men, and many of them can be identified by gynocentrism, by what happens on both sides of the political fence. You mentioned that, yes, that Scott Brown's vote held up a Fair Pay Act. Other than that, I mean, we're certainly, there's examples. There were Republican votes against the reauthorization of VAWA. There was Republican votes against the original passing of VAWA. That's certainly nothing new to this picture. However, it doesn't change the fact that VAWA was reauthorized by a Republican president with a Republican control of the House and Senate, and that for the most part, 99+% of any form of feminist governance we deal with. I'll use the Dear Colleague letter as an example. We have young men right now being just totally railroaded in on allegations of sexual assault on campuses. They're not afforded any sort of real due process by which we view that. Where is John McCain made some weak statement about wanting answers. He was never answered, and he never brought up the issue again. We have a horrific problem with fear of the feminist lobby, fear of voters, and gynocentrism as a whole in the voting population. It's very, very easy to characterize men who oppose things like a Dear Colleague or politicians who do as misogynistic, woman-hating, as pro-rape, as our opponents certainly do that. But we don't have politicians in the left or the right that stand up to these issues at all. You don't ever hear any political rhetoric from the right. Now, I appreciate the lesson on Locke, but unfortunately, this is not the conservatism of Locke or even William F. Buckley. This is the conservatism of Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity that is governing political matters on the right in this country right now. And the question is whether or not there's a solution. And I would argue with Tucker Carlson running around telling Dr. Helen Smith that men need to man up, and literally made the case that men need to be willing to take a raw deal in order to get married and take care of women, that it's a pipe dream to sit here and discuss in any realistic way, to pretend that what we have on the political right in this country holds solutions. And I won't go on about it too much, but I'll have to go back to one of the original points I made in my opening and bring the question back to bear again. In looking at the political landscape and the issues, they're getting too numerous to name the different issues that affect men and boys: circumcision, reproductive rights, false allegations, lack of due process, the domestic violence laws that discriminate against men, primary aggressor laws. I mean, they go down and down the list. They're just incredible what's happening to men in this culture. The discrimination that they're facing, the wholesale undermining of the Constitution. Where are the politicians on the right that are doing anything about this? If they were there, believe me, I would be hauling out my "What Would Hannity Do" bracelet and wearing it proudly wherever I go. But I don't see them doing anything but reinforcing the problem with gynocentrism and with enforced chivalry. And until we address that in our culture, we could sit here and pontificate all day about how, well, Scott Brown voted against one bill some time ago, and he held it up, and it was a really good thing. In the meantime, the men and boys are going down the toilet. And I want to have a better discussion about better solutions than that. Thank you.
Well, in the paycheck fairness, your last question was, name me one incidence where Republicans stood up to, discrimination against men. I think that's a good example, and it's a recent example. But if you look at the early feminists, they had grievances coming out of everywhere, but they had a focus, and they chose their battles, and they allied themselves with the Democratic Party. And that issue was abortion and Roe v. Wade, and that is, the predominant issue with them to this day, obviously. And now they're fighting changes to the law, such as late-term abortion and things like that in many states around the country, red states around the country. But they pick their battles, and that's something that a social movement has to do to gain traction. And it's also something that politicians need to do as well. If there was a politician that went around championing the causes of men, there are just other things. And I think Todd Kelly said it best when he said that MRAs just have no political instinct, and I couldn't have agreed with him more. Because I think he's kind of a subjective outsider looking in. I think he's I think he has journalistic ethics, and I think he was very right about that. And that you do have to have some political savvy, because otherwise, what's the end game, of this movement? To just keep informing people that men are pissed on, or men that there is no real equality in these given areas between men and women, and it's not fair to men and boys. It's just too much. You need to pick a battle that you can win, and I think the VAWA case would be very compelling, and then it would start. You'd start to get the national recognition that you've been on the verge of getting anyway. And I think the message, and I've talked to Bill Price about this over at our friend at the Spearhead, about feminism is just it's really on the wane. I mean, people are just, I think they jumped the shark with the slut walks, truly, and they've just come out with insane things, and it goes around on the internet, and people kind of see it, and they kind of get it, that it's just, at this point, it's just simply ridiculous. And I don't think they have the pull that they did. But when it comes to this reproductive rights issue, they have that, and they've got Democratic support, and then the Republicans have the evangelical side, and they've got that side kind of battling for the right to life people. But we don't want any part of that issue, and the men's rights arena shouldn't even position itself necessarily as conservative or liberal. If you'll notice, the National Organization of Women is very careful about that. They obviously support Democrats and Democratic policies, but they don't, they really go around the edges there. They do have their own Democratic PAC, however. I don't know how much that generates, but I'm sure it's at least $1 million to donate to state senators somewhere, state representatives, congressmen, senators, even the president. which is kind of a big deal for them, and they can hide that too. You know how the PAC situation works, but they're very clever about it, and I think it would be a mistake for the men's rights community to come out and say, yeah, we're right wing, yeah, we're conservative. I mean, most people, at least the students up in Toronto, think you are anyway. They just automatically assume these are right wing nut jobs or something, and then you try to profess, no, 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 we're not. We're just humanists. We want human rights, and that's not going to fly with them. You're going to be labeled anyway people decide to label you, but you don't have to necessarily label yourselves as right wing. You just need to look. You're going to need to look towards the right for resolution of some key issue, because the left is never going to help you, and the left owns the grievance industry. And then they're not going to let you become a member of it, and you're gonna, it's just never ever going to happen, because the left also owns women as a grievance group, along with blacks, Latinos, gays, etc. So they're kind of that's the grievance industry base that the Democrats depend on. So you're not going to play in that arena, so you're probably going to have to look for some kind of resolution on the right, because the right is against these grievance group. The right is the conservatives about the individual and the power of the individual. So you're going to need to be rather clever about how you approach it, but you can't just go through this litany of grievances and overwhelm people with it. You need to choose your battle and go forward with it in the right kind of way, and if you win, then you start getting national attention and national traction. And as I said, I think you're on the verge of that, or we are. At this point, it's starting to happen.
Okay, well, that concludes our rebuttal section to our opening statements. Each of our participants had an opportunity within 5 minutes each. Now we will move on. We're going to start with Paul Elam, and he's going to ask one question. Keyster, you will have 3 minutes to answer the question, and then you may ask yours, and we will do this twice. Paul, go ahead.
Thank you, James. Keyster, one of the many litany of issues that you feel like are too numerous for us to address all at once is the idea of reproductive choice for men. The idea of, as long as women have legal access to unilateral abortion and can make that decision within a legal framework, why then should men not have that option as well, to legally terminate their parental responsibilities and opt to not parent a child, which is essentially the equivalent of what abortion is for women, legally speaking, not in the physical part. So how, in your left-right paradigm, will the right, with all of its fundamentalist components and religious backers, further the right of men to opt out of fatherhood within the same period of time that women can do so with abortion?
Well, there have been some cases that I'm sure you're aware of, because you track these things as closely as I do. I think it was a case out of Utah that came up where the father wanted parental rights and couldn't get them. And these kinds of cases are going to need to work their way up through the court system, and MRAs should do just like what feminists do to support cases regarding especially women's reproductive rights, should support that kind of case and use that case as a precedent to bring it into legislation. Now, I don't know how many MRAs there are in Utah. There's probably a few, but I know the National Organization of Women has satellite offices in just about every major city and academic center in the country, and they fight those things locally. I don't know how men do, but I think it's just, the reproductive rights issue is really, really stands beneath everything, because women make babies, women gestate babies, men do not. Men have other purposes. The female has a purpose to, and the male has the purpose to procreate, and women get a special dispensation for that, and men really don't have any reproductive rights, and I think that's something that needs to be talked about. I don't think that's necessarily the thing that I would go after. I think it would be more. I think people tend to be more empathetic towards fathers and fatherhood, especially, and single mom homes really affecting society in a negative way, and that's something that I think on the conservative side that they'll be able to sink their teeth into. It'll really resonate with them, but it's to me it just needs to be worked. There will be cases of this that come up, and these cultural issues bubble up, and then they start to gain political action, eventually political momentum, and I think we're probably going to start to see more and more men saying she has no right to deny me the birth of that child just because it's her body. And I think that's an argument that's going to play out in the years to come, and how it ends up, I don't know.
All right, Keyster. You've had within your 3 minutes to provide an answer. At this time, you may ask your question of Mr. Elam.
Well, I guess to me is for the men's rights, to start to make this transition into the political realm and start to be, start to have more political instincts, if you will, and understand how to work through that system. In that context, I don't really understand what the end game is, other than to continue to enlighten people, and more people are enlightened than ever before about these gender issues and men versus women, and it is starting to break. Soon it is going to break. What's the end game? How do you like our Todd Kelly had asked, what's the how they can't really articulate how they plan to resolve these issues. We're kind of moving on past the Enlightenment propaganda stage and moving into the political arena, because that's where the social movements need to move towards to resolve and have their grievances addressed.
So I'm sorry, what is the question?
Well, the question is, if it's not political, and if left and right, left won't help you, right is practically just as bad. There's really nothing we can do until, I guess, the entire system collapses and something, bubbles up from it. If you can't solve the problem of men through political, legislative, or judicial action, then how are you going to do it?
Well, I think presupposing that all solutions to these issues must come somehow from the political realm is, it wants to, in my opinion, statist and dependent on government, and is part of the problem that the left brings us, that somehow that our answers need to come out of Washington or our state governments to all these problems, and I'm just not buying it. It
was Washington and the state governments.
Keyster.
Yeah, go ahead.
He's got 3 minutes to answer the question.
Okay.
So I'm not buying I don't think Todd Kelly was unbiased. I think he was extremely biased in his approach to this, and I don't think Todd Kelly understands the nature of the men movement. We have a growing, expanding community of men out there right now that identify as men going their own way. They're not looking for a political representative to take care of their problems. They're not looking for political solutions to a lot. What they're doing is saying, fuck this, I'm going my own way. What they're doing is starting to do what the exact opposite that men have been programmed to do for generation after generation, which is to be gynocentric and to put themselves at disposable availability to their societies, and men are going their own way and saying, you know what, that's not me anymore. That is an end for some men. That is the destination that they need. On the other hand, we have a lot of other issues that are really driven by public discourse, that if we even want to, say, get into the political realm, we have to understand that the first thing that probably is going to need to change is the public discourse, which is an ongoing mission. That's what AVFM does. We have already, and I believe we played a very significant role in forcing feminists on the defensive, and also beginning to force traditionalists on the defensive, and people that use men in a utilitarian way and view them as potential conscripts and draftees and sort of step-and-fetches for the modern family unit for as long as the courts allow them to be married and live in the home. There is an end game in men recognizing how rigged this system is and choosing not to participate or choosing to protect themselves from the dangers that are out there. We're not looking for people's approval. We're not looking, I'm not looking for any political candidate to back or a political platform to get behind. I want to make people miserable that further bad policies and pass laws, and I want to expose the corruption of it, and I want to start conversations about how out of control this sort of thing is. But I'm not here to belong to anybody's group but my own.
Okay, Mr. Elam, you have answered Keyster's question within the 3 minutes of allotted time. At this point, you may ask another question of Keyster.
My question is a follow-up to the conversation that we're having right now, and I'm curious, what is it about the lives of men or the issues that they face, this whole conglomeration of different ideas, philosophies, problems going on in this culture? What is it about that group of problems that you imagine that men must convert to a mainstream political answer for these problems?
Well, I mean, you know, men can do whatever they want to based on their, you know, philosophical beliefs and you know, how they respond. But if you're a men's rights activist, you're obviously going to find many more friends, and especially with regard to fatherhood and family, you know, the intact nuclear family on the right, than you are on the left. I mean, you're just gonna knock your head against the wall when it comes to the left. I think, you know, you're trying to say you're looking at equality, but I don't think, you know, there can never be equality as long as women reproduce, and women select men differently, and men and women are so different but so much the same, and we need each other so much, and we need less division against us and more. And I think you know, what I find on the right is, I mean, you can continue this social movement and this axiom of men going their own way, but the majority of men and women are still going to get together and they're still going to mate, because that's what they're driven to do. That's what we're all driven to do, and I don't think there's going to be this grand exodus of men from the mating scene. I mean, there is kind of to a certain extent, you know, with the hipster level and things like that, but they're always going to get together, and they're not your friends. I mean, men that are basically gender nihilists, they're not going to be able to help you politically, you know, whatsoever at all. They have no opinion, and everything is screwed up, and we're just going to not do anything, but we're going to keep trying to spread the word to other men to not do anything either. And maybe if enough men stop doing things, you know, the politicians and the public discourse, as you say, will start to notice. And there's already some of that going on with Helen Smith's book and things like that, but it's not really gaining traction. I mean, at at least Americans are just trying to get by and hope they have a job this time next year. You know, that they really don't consider these things that much. You know, we're all fanatics, gender fanatics, and we all maybe know too much for our own good.
Okay.
But you know, if I have more time, James,
you go ahead. You've got about 20 seconds.
20 seconds. You'd think we were going to commercial break, but I would say that men have been defending women and their tribes and their territories since time immemorial, and women have been mothers and giving birth to babies and nurturing them since then too. I think one of the great divides here is when forceps were developed in the 19th century, and the death rate of mothers dropped considerably. At the same time, the death rate of men in war defending those women, those families, that country, their community, whatever it might have been in whatever land. I think you know, that's been going on forever, and I think it'll continue to go on forever. I don't think, you know, nobody is conscription is really an anachronism at this point. I mean, nobody's really constricting or drafting, you know, men right now. I think that whole cadard has kind of moved on, and
Keyster?
it's not going to excite anybody.
I've got a call time on you.
Okay.
However, you will be able to ask your question of Mr. Elam.
Well, I really don't have any other questions, you know, other than, well, I'm not really sure about the obsession with Bill Bennett. I mean, Bill Bennett is kind of a D-list conservative. He really, you know, he really doesn't have any voice on these matters. He doesn't have that much credibility. But
did you have a question for Mr. Elam?
No, I really don't.
Okay. All right.
I mean, I'm just following up on some of the things. I could go through all the things he addressed in his 10-minute introduction if you'd like. Phyllis Schlafly and family courts and Bill Bennett.
At this point, if you have no other questions, then we can move on to our closing statements, which will be at 5 minutes each. And Mr. Elam will begin the closing statements.
Is men's rights a left versus right issue? I don't know if anyone can ever definitively prove or disprove this point. But if I honestly, and this is my honest opinion, if I had to go by the contents of this debate, I would say it has been proved that it is not a left versus right issue. I think what we've heard here from Keyster, and I certainly have always respected his opinion. He's very well versed in politics and has a great understanding of our political system. What I think he does not understand particularly well is the men's rights movement and the shape that it is now taking and the direction that it's now going and why. What I have heard a lot of is a lot of talk about picking arguments and molding yourself to the mainstream, and ultimately leading back to the traditional model of men and women in their respective sexual roles, doing what we've always done for centuries. And I believe that for now, and not that that was not a good system, it was. I believe in every sense of the word that the nuclear family was the fabric of society. It was the foundation on which great nations were built, and it is a ship that has sailed, and that we are not putting that toothpaste back in the tube. But even if we are, let us suppose that someday that we can return to that lifestyle. In the meantime, we have a institution of marriage legally that is unsafe for men. We have schools that are unsafe for boys and young men and grown men. We have a lot of institutions so corrupted either by feminism or by other forms of gynocentrism, and we have gynocentric politicians that are perpetuating those problems with no solutions on the horizon. Keyster has not pointed to any solutions on our horizon. Nobody is going to, because they are simply not there. They do not exist at this point in time. And there are men in our culture, I would argue all of them, that need answers now. They don't need theoretical answers on what some right-wing politician might do for them 20 years down the road if we mold ourselves and hold our hat in our hands and pick our arguments carefully going down the road. There are solutions that are needed right now. And some of those solutions, yes, Keyster, they are checking out. They are going somewhere other than where the danger is. And that's a rational, intelligent response to what is happening in this culture now. Is there a solution for this on the right or the left? Absolutely not. This is why this is not a right versus left issue. This is an issue about men educating themselves about what the dangers in their lives are. It's an issue about educating mothers and fathers about what is facing their sons. It's also an issue about educating parents about how their daughters are being raised and the sense of entitlement that is being filtered into their brains just about from birth and where that is going. There is a lot of work that can be done. But if we are going to look to the political system that created this garbage for the answer, we're looking in the wrong place. And I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Elam has ceded the rest of his time. Keyster, you have 5 minutes for your closing argument.
Well, Paul, I mean, that's precisely why you need the political system, because the political system, primarily driven by the left, is what caused this, you know, and the groupthink of feminism and you know, these things have been enacted. I mean, there wasn't a single conservative or Republican policy passed without, you know, to assist women at the behest of men without the assistance of, or at least the glowing approval of all Democrats. You know, it wasn't even, you know, that's including what was a party line vote. The Dear Colleague letter, I mean, that's something that came out of the Department of, you know, a Democratic Department of Education. You know, conservatives would like to just do away with the Department of Education completely, and I think conservatism is about the, you know, the power of the individual, and it's not about grievance groups. If you have grievances, you can get them addressed, or you can keep complaining on the internet, which, you know, has some effect too, and it has had some effect. But it starts to come off as whining after a while until you start seeing, you know, real action on the political front and some things that you can point to that you can do and that you are doing. And I think that's what our Todd Kelly was asking, and I agree with that. And it's not really that hard to do, you know. But if you want the movement to move on, just like all movements, and perhaps you'll be the only movement to change the world without, you know, political solutions, where people will just spontaneously realize men are screwed and women have it better, which, you know, most people know anyway in some ways. You know, I mean, you can keep doing that, but I don't think anybody cares unless you can gain a little power politically. You know, the only power you have right now is a voice on the internet. And as far as the men right now, well, these solutions take a long time in a democracy, you know, and I'm sorry, but, you know, women's rights and winning Roe v. Wade took years, you know, for them battling for their reproductive rights and their right to choose whether they have a baby or not. And I think, you know, this kind of men's rights thing, which is probably a misnomer to begin with, is, you know, it has to start looking somewhere, and you will not find these friends on the left. You will not find support on the left. You will find support on the right for fathers, for boys, for discrimination against men and boys, for, you know, equal rights under the law, such as the 14th Amendment, Equal Protection Clause. Those are things that conservatives and Republicans can really grasp and will really start to agitate their base a little more. But eventually something's going to need to give, and I think that's going to be through political solution, because basically we have to unwind so much of what the left has done, and we have to do that a step at a time. And I think the very first thing would be VAWA at the national level, through the judicial system, because it's in clear violation of the Constitution. And I think fathers' rights would be on the state level. There's no other way to look at that. And you start picking apart custody laws state by state, and look at a state where you have the possibility to win. Now, you're probably not going to win in a left of center state on that one, because the left depends on the female vote, and I pointed that out in the beginning, that the majority of women do vote Democrat. But start looking at that and seeing what battle can be won, and pick that battle and really focus what limited resources there are on that, and trying to win it. Or just be an information site and a philosophical site, and kind of keep everything at the philosophical level. If there are men that want to check out, fine. If there are men that just want to understand more about men and men's issues and how to best raise their sons, that's fine too. There's a lot to be said for that. But it's not really a movement per se if you don't have any political push, from underneath, and some political power. And politicians are going to want to know if you can get them votes, and you can get plenty of disenfranchised fathers and men's votes through the Republican Party. And by the way, disclaimer: I'm not a Republican. I'm a member of the Libertarian Party. So anyway, that's all I have to say.
Okay. At this point, we will go ahead and conclude our debate. Keyster and Mr. Elam, thank you very much for showing up and for abiding by the rules of our debate. We hope to have more debates in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.